Diron is one of the elite European forecasters who sits on the ECB Shadow Council. She's a senior economist at Oxford Economics, and as you can see, she joins me in the studio now. Marie, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming in. So I guess these stress tests have been pretty severely criticised for failing to take into account the severity of the debt crisis. It didn't test for a default scenario for Greece, and that seems to be upmost in investors' minds right now. So with that in mind, how difficult is it going to be to soothe the market concerns, despite the fact that, well, all the big European banks passed?
Yes, it is the shame that the tests are not testing for the key question at the moment, something that is even mentioned by EU official, possible default on Greek sovereign debt. Having said that, we hope that the stress tests will putting some data on the table and so are increasing transparency, and that's really one of the main points of the tests. So one possible good outcome of that is that there's more discrepancy more heterogeneity between banks in the market, and that the stronger banks are finding that they can access markets more easily at better conditions, and the weaker banks then will need to restructure their capital structure.
So then looking forward, does this increase transparency? Does this information about the extent of the bank's exposure to sovereign debt holdings, will all this go towards stemming the fallout in any worst-case scenario?
We hope that, yes, there is some information there that was not available before, so it does help. We would have liked more information. There's not enough detail to really assess the big risk of contagion in the case of default, and that's really what is holding really policymakers in this discussion. The fear that we see a repeat of Lehman Brothers, that it's not so much a direct exposure to Greek government debt, but then all the domino effects.
Credit contraction, where banks are wary of lending to each other.
That is a big risk, and so we're getting a bit better data with this test, but not the full extent to really be in confident position that we can go into a default on Greek sovereign debt with the insurance that this will be ring-fenced and that the contagion will be limited.
And I guess looking forward, an even bigger issue is providing a backstop for these banks, because we have 8 lenders that failed, but then you have another 16 that are sort of sitting on the cusp that have capital ratios of just 6%. So, I mean, is this something that European policymakers need to be thinking increasingly about? You know, there's so much focus on sovereign debt restructuring, debt buybacks, debt swaps with regards to Greece. But what about the banks? Because, you know, many people say it's essentially a banking crisis, and if something goes wrong, well, a national government's in a position to inject more capital into banks.
No, that's right. So what you need to do, the test is one thing, but then you need to follow that up with actions. And I think on the failed banks, there were not many surprises there. The number is actually relatively small. The focus now is on these banks that nearly failed, and where really the onus is on governments to get their act together and do something about the banking sector. In Spain, we know there's a plan in place, and that should deliver the expected results. In other countries, then there's more uncertainty about what governments will actually do.
Yeah, and with that in mind, I have to ask you about the summit coming up this week. You know, European leaders, what do they have to achieve to make sure that the likes of Spain and Italy, the core Eurozone countries, are not tested in the markets?
Yeah, so we've seen a very rapid change in sentiment on Italy last week, and I think that should be a big alarm sign for governments that there's no time to waste, and we've already wasted enough time in this crisis. What they need to do is eventually really moving towards a comprehensive solution. We've had enough of these short-term backstop, and eventually what they need to do is come up with some form of Eurobonds or really community on this fiscal situation.
Maryam, good to talk to you. Thank you very much. Senior economist at Oxford Economics and former principal economist at the European Central Bank. Thank you.